Welcome to InterPartyConflict, the podcast where we answer your questions so you can have the best tabletop gaming experience possible. My name is Gabe.
My name is Jeff.
And we have a very special guest with us today, Damien from Adventures in Aurelia.
Hey, I'm Damien the DM, Dungeon Master for Adventures in Aurelia.
There you go. Yeah, we've had you on the show a couple times.
I think this is time 3 for me.
This is time 3. You were on episode 47, and then you and Caitlin were on episode 144.
What is this? Is this 240 something?
246, I think.
Really? So it's all been 40-ish and then spaced out 100 episodes.
Kinda, yeah. It didn't even occur to me until just now. That's pretty cool.
Wait, so if this is his third episode, does he get like a free Sunday or something?
I would give you a free Sunday,
I get a T-shirt.
So, while we're on the subject of T-shirts, I will say on our Patreon, which it's basically just the $1 tier now. We've gotten rid of most stuff, and most people have left the Patreon. No problems. That was expected.
Right.
If we had gotten to, I think it's like $300 a month. So it was a lofty goal, but if we had gotten to that goal, I was going to design a shirt, and then, people could buy shirts if they wanted to buy shirts. That was a goal that anybody could see. Anybody could just go and look at what our Patreon goals were. But I also had in my mind a little secret goal. If we got to that point, I was going to just send all of our current patrons a shirt. Like, they wouldn't have to buy it. Everybody who was a patron at that time was just going to get a shirt for free.
We've done that with postcards.
We never got anywhere close to that, so did not happen, unfortunately. So it would be nice, I guess is what I'm saying. It would be nice if we had shirts. If we had shirts, I would send one to you, but only one InterPartyConflict shirt exists, and it's mine. So
yeah,
I was going to say, I know the shirt exists.
Right.
Gabe blames everybody else for us.
Yeah, there you go.
No. There was also like the misunderstanding because like the different tiers were symbolized by shirts. And
That's
so
true. Yeah,
everyone was
That's why I know the
where's
shirt
our
exists.
Oh, the shirt that was in the picture, that was a mock-up. That was just, I found somebody on Reddit that just photoshopped some shirts. I never had physical shirts of blue and green and whatnot. I just had one that I made myself when we first started the podcast.
But that means the design is done. You just got to slap it on a shirt.
I guess.
Yeah, it's just all the logo, but
yeah.
Technically, we have shirts, and that's all I did.
I guess that works. Yeah. So, Damien, tell our listeners what Adventures in Aurelia is, if by chance they haven't listened to 100 episodes ago or 200 episodes ago. Where are you from? What's your show? What's it all about?
So, Adventures in Aurelia is a 5th edition actual play podcast that is myself and 4 friends that all play and record ourselves in my living room. Our kind of tagline is where 5 friends sit around the table and record themselves playing Dungeons and Dragons.
There you go.
And it's a fairly, especially modern incarnation of it, is a fairly tightly edited show and relatively high on the production. I do a bunch of sound design with ambience, background music, sound effects, and kind of the background of the show at this point is we're 5 friends sitting around playing a regular game of D&D, and then I spend 30 to 40 hours editing it to make it a concise story.
Oh boy, yeah. Yeah, editing an actual play podcast is a lot of work.
I think a regular recording for us is about 4 hours, and I get about an hour and a half out of it.
Wow. Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah, I didn't. So we had our own little foray into an actual play a few years ago, and I didn't even edit it very much. I kind of did like a very bare bones thing, and that still took. I think I put it out like a year after we were.
And I've teased you about it ever since.
Oh.
Someday I would love to get back into, love to do some sort of an actual play, but I don't know if I ever will because it is a lot of work. So
it is. Our production schedule slides a bit because of it, but
sure.
I've gotten to a point where with the amount of shows that I listen to, it's just like, no, I want that level of production for me to enjoy it. I had a very interesting conversation with a coworker the other day that's just like, what do you mean you're not listening to this week's episode of Critical Role? I'm like, I'm listening to my show that I just released. Like, you listen to your own show?
Yeah.
Like, yes, I do. Every time it comes out.
Right.
I usually go back and listen a couple months afterwards too.
And I'll bet, there's nothing against you because I do the same thing. I'll bet you find mistakes that you made, on the third or fourth pass. You probably still notice stuff that you missed.
Oh, the worst for me is it's happened a couple times where I will release an episode. Normally it releases at night or early morning before I listen to it at work. Sure. But I'll have already started putting, tweets out, posting it in Discord and stuff. And then I listen to it 6 hours after it's been out and I just go, uh-oh, there's 2 minutes here where I cut someone's track that is having a conversation. So it ends up being a one-sided conversation. Like, write myself a note, go fix this when I get home.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then you're like, it's like, okay, that's 6 hours of people listening to it where they're wait, what's happening?
Right.
Yeah.
But hey, I've listened to lots of podcasts that don't ever fix that. I've listened to stuff that came out like a year, 2 years ago, and it still has errors like that. And it frustrates me because, similarly, I put a lot of work into this. I take a lot of pride in our editing. And so when I notice something that even has gone 6 hours without being fixed, I'm so embarrassed for myself. So when somebody else clearly doesn't listen to their own stuff after it goes out, it's like, what are you doing? But I mean, I understand I have maybe unfairly high standards. Not everybody has the same high standards as me, and not everybody has to.
Becoming a podcaster was like the worst thing for me as far as standards in podcasting went.
Yeah.
Because I know the process and everything. It's just like, please edit your show, please.
Right. So I guess if anybody out there is like looking to start a podcast, I'm not every audience member. Please don't expect everyone to be as critical as I am. And I apologize for being as critical as I am. I'm mostly critical of myself, much more so than anybody else. So anyway, Damien, I don't remember if I've ever asked you in the times you've been on the show. I don't recall if I've ever asked you how you got into Dungeons and Dragons or just tabletop role playing. Whether you have answered that question to me or not, why don't you tell us again if I have asked that question before?
So I actually got into D&D super late, considering my nerdy tendencies growing up. Mm-hmm. Like, I was always into video games and fantasy stuff. I didn't discover Dungeons and Dragons until I was like 20 or 21. And that was because the friend group that I played Magic the Gathering with started up, or they already had a Pathfinder game going, but I think something with someone's schedule changed where they needed to have Pathfinder on what was Magic nights. And they were just like, so yeah, we're not doing Magic anymore on Saturdays, but we're going to be doing Pathfinder. Do you want to join our Pathfinder game? It's like, I don't know what this is, but you guys are what I do on Saturday nights. So sure, I'll give it a shot.
Cool.
Right.
And then the rest is history.
And then that friend group at this point, I'm 28 now. I see them mostly as acquaintances at this point, and got into 5th edition in that group, got into building my own world, and then from there wanted to start running my own sessions. And then my wife talked to some coworkers, and now we've got a solid group of 5 of us that it started out as playing board games, turned into D&D. Now we do things like go to the Ren Fair together and camp out all weekend.
That's really cool.
Nice.
Yeah, hopefully, someday when COVID is less of a problem, or possibly in the rearview mirror, I think it'd be great to do more group stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Jeff, how are you doing today?
Oh, am I here? I'm sorry. No,
sorry, you are here. Yes.
No, it's fine. It's fine. No, I'm more than happy to take a back seat when we have guests over, because usually people are way more interesting than I am. So
sure. Also, we're recording this fairly late, listeners, because my work sucks. Yeah.
I got to get an air horn on my soundboard. I need to fix that.
I'll put it in post.
I
There will be an
I've
air
yet to
horn
put
in
it in
there
there.
somewhere.
But no, I'm doing fine. But yeah, like Gabe said, we're recording a bit late. I'm I don't know. It's Saturday night. I maybe wouldn't be in bed by now, but I'd definitely be winding down.
Sure.
I don't know what you guys are talking about. It's only 9:30.
You crazy. You crazy West Coast. Yeah, no, I'm doing okay. I finished my first week at my new job.
Oh, cool. Congratulations.
Yeah,
how's that going?
It's going good.
Okay.
It's a lot. There is a lot to learn. Like they're kind of throwing a lot at us really quickly, and then like the rush period for this job is coming up like really soon.
Oh, okay.
Which is one of the reasons why they wanted to hire in more people, is because like they need, one, they definitely needed more people just in general, and then two, the rush period's coming up, so like they want to make sure they have those people available.
Sure.
But it's going to be mostly remote for me, and I've never had a remote job, and it's definitely going to take some getting used to, but I think it should be good because I don't know, I'm at my computer most of the day anyway when I'm not at work, so like I feel very in my element.
So
even
now,
when I'm working.
now you get to associate your leisure time with work.
That is going to take some adjusting.
Sure.
Like there was a point on one of the days where I was working from home where I'm like, I need to go outside. I have to go walk or something. I go for a walk or something. I need to get I need to get off of my chair here.
Sure.
So I'm definitely going to have to change some things.
Start setting an hour timer to stand up and go walk around the room.
Yeah, because like at my previous job, like I'd be at my desk most of the day, but like at my desk at the work though. But there's a good amount of that job where I would have to like basically like go run into a warehouse, run around looking for a particular pallet on a particular shelf, and so like it was a little bit more physical, like not crazy, but anyway, yeah. So new job going well. I'm excited about it, and I guess that's it.
Cool. So Damien, you guys did the Extra Life game day recently, correct?
Yeah. We have the last 4 years now. Team Aurelia has gotten together to stream for Extra Life's game day, which is a 24/25 hour gaming marathon, because the last couple of years it's always been on the daylight savings time crossover.
Oh,
right.
So to be fair, I haven't made it 24 hours the entire time we've done it.
Sure.
But this year we had our best year yet. We've raised $2,101 for Children's Miracle Network hospitals.
That is awesome.
And to date, for the last 4 years now, that puts us over $4,000 that we've raised for Children's Miracle Network.
That's amazing. Good job.
Yeah, I thought it was cool. I actually put together an infographic for it as a thank you to people that have donated, and it was like, not only have we done better every year, this year we did better than every previous year put together.
Heck yeah.
That's really cool. I think, Jeff, you've done it the last few years, but this year I know it was not really feasible for either of us.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, it just didn't have the time of like going between jobs and stuff like that. It was,
Yeah.
It snuck up on us. It was
yeah, absolutely.
So we do this thing every year. So it's 4 years now that we've done it, and we do game day. We're super hyped, kind of riding the high after game day. Things are going well. We're raising money to help kids in need, and so it's like, yeah, next year we're gonna do better than the year before. And so last year, same thing. I created the team right away at the beginning of the year, and then we promptly forgot about it until October. And one of the people on our team, one of my friends, he goes, "Hey, Extra Life is in a month. Are we still gonna do something for this?" And it's just like, Oh, it's in a month. Oh, we haven't. 3 of you guys aren't even in the team yet. Like, that was another reason that the last episode we did came out extra late, was because I was like, all right, instead of working on this, I'm now in, like, I've got a month. We have to prep a 24-hour stream. Got to talk to everyone on the team, figure out availability, what games we're going to play, start getting graphics set up for it. And once again, as we finished this year, we're going to start next year early.
There you go.
Early, we'll see if early is actually early, but we've all said that we're going to start early next year.
Well, cool. Yeah, I mean, whatever the process has been, it seems like you've been doing some great work. So congratulations.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's not for us. So the fact that it went as good as it did made me just feel amazing about it.
Yeah.
The fact that we pulled it together, even on short notice, and still raised over $2,000 was a major win in my book, which is part of why we want to start earlier. Like, what could we do if we actually started in January?
Sure. That's really cool. All right. Well, you guys want to go ahead and get into this episode?
Sure.
Cool.
Are we not into the episode yet?
Well, I mean, not really. So we've been going a little long, so I'll keep this one short. I want the 2 of you to give me a perception check.
Oh, shoot.
The closest dice I have for Genesis. That's not going to help.
I rolled an 18, Gabe.
Okay. Jeff, you just found a big pile of gold. Do you know what that big pile of gold is?
I have an idea, but why don't you tell me?
That big pile of gold is the dragon's hoard.
I was being cheeky and pulled out my D30. I got a 23.
You actually found 2 dragon's hoards.
Yeah, you found
somehow
next
or another.
week's dragon's hoard.
Yes.
Oh, sweet.
All right, and Damien actually brought in today's magic item, and today's magic item is Hope's Justice. This is a short sword, an uncommon item that requires attunement by a good-aligned creature.
Ooh.
Originally purchased by Kanina as a masterwork longsword from Ulal Hammerfall in the village of Starin, this sword became more with the death of Grimfang. Ulal had put his heart and soul into crafting the blade to help get the name of a simple toolsmith from a small village out there as someone worthy of making weapons wielded by heroes. He parted with it below cost in exchange for a promise. Use the sword to kill Grimfang and spread his name around as the dwarf who made it. Kanina fulfilled the promise by using the sword to help defeat Grimfang and felt a warmth as she held it in her hands. With the intent the swordsmith instilled into the sword fulfilled, the blade took on magical properties to help it achieve similar goals. The sword now deals radiant damage as part of its attacks, and additional radiant damage against undead creatures. After seeking insight from a diviner at the Midnight Carnival, Kanina decided to give this sword the name Hope's Justice. Mechanics-wise, you have a +1 bonus to attack and damage rolls made with this weapon, and the weapon deals an extra 1d6 radiant damage to all creatures and an additional 1d6 radiant damage to undead creatures. Proficiency with a short sword allows you to add your proficiency bonus to the attack roll of any attack you make with it. So, mechanics-wise, relatively simple. You know, it's a +1 sword that deals d6 radiant, or 2d6 if it's an undead creature. But I think what a lot of the appeal of this weapon is, of course, the flavor, the backstory, the world building that comes forth from the description that you've given it here. I love the sound of a Midnight Carnival. Finding a diviner at the Midnight Carnival, thumbs up from me. Whatever campaign you're in, I'm hooked.
Yeah, so it sounds very goth.
Yes.
I'm actually editing the episode that scene happens in right now.
Cool.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So this is something from Adventures in Aurelia, from the campaign that you guys are playing in.
Yep. Kanina is our tiefling sorcerer, actually, that plans on eventually multi-classing into some form of fighter. So probably the Eldritch Knight when levels allow.
Cool.
And kind of the backstory behind this is the party had been investigating, or the party originally was traveling along a road between two major cities and were attacked by a band of gnolls. Okay. And through talking to the town that they arrived in, they found out that this band of gnolls has been attacking people on the road, making it unsafe. There's this legend of Grimfang that is a gnoll larger than life that is what has banded these gnolls together and kind of set them on this course. So the party took it on themselves to find out about this and see if they could put a stop to it.
As parties do.
Yep. And as word got out that they were planning on doing this, they were approached by the toolsmith for this village. So this is a small village, so the toolsmith was, known for making horseshoes, shovels, keeping maintenance up on everything. But in his off time, he had worked on this sword. I class it as a mastercraft weapon when I first introduced it to them. And when I first introduced it, it was always planned from me that this sword was a simple masterwork weapon that could have magical properties unlocked if they actually did what Ulal asked and used it to kill Grimfang. So the sorcerer decided to take it. She did use it in the fight against Grimfang. I actually planned to have a little bit more if it dealt the killing blow to Grimfang, but the fact that it was used at all was enough to awaken this magical ability in it that ultimately, in my world, magic items are a little more rare, especially more powerful magic items, and they come about through things like this, where the weapon was built with an intent behind it. It had a purpose, and it was used to fulfill that purpose that instilled it with magical energies to aid it in fulfilling essentially its destiny.
Sure.
It also helps that Grimfang was a big magical undead gnoll, so that helped kind of feed into unlocking magical abilities within it.
Sure. Yeah. I'm all for Weapons of Legacy, which is like there's a 3rd edition book that was called that. Like that's what they classified these types of weapons as an item that maybe was just kind of an ordinary weapon or a lesser magic item that then achieved a destiny that gave it more power. And I love that concept. I'll always love it. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I really like this idea.
And if they hadn't used it to kill Grimfang, it would have just stayed a masterwork sword. It still would have had the +1 to attack. I think because masterwork doesn't exist in 5th edition, I think the rules for it I might have given as a +1 to attack and damage. Might just be attack. I can't remember off the top of my head. Yeah. But if they hadn't fulfilled its destiny, it would have just stayed a plain, mundane, but still beautifully crafted sword.
Sure. But yeah, that's really cool. I think this is a cool item. I think, and I did just notice one thing at the bottom. It says proficiency with a short sword allows you to add your proficiency bonus, so you can use it if you can use a short sword or a long sword. Is that correct?
No, it's
or was that a typo?
Damien doesn't remember if I canonically made it a long sword or a short sword.
Okay. Well, because there is precedent for magic swords that do that. I know the Sunblade, you could use the proficiency for either. At least back in 3rd edition, you could. So I wasn't sure if that was an intentional thing. Sorry.
No, I think it was intended to be a short sword, but I realized after you were reading it, I was like, oh, it says short sword and then it says long sword. I'm going to have to... Beautiful thing about a podcast, I can go back and listen and see what I told them.
Okay.
I really like this idea that like magical items become magical because they fulfill a purpose. Like I like that idea. It's like that's just a rule of the world, being that when a smith crafts a weapon, they craft it for a purpose, and then if that purpose is fulfilled, that weapon then becomes magical. And that is how magical, like I like the idea that is the only way that magical items come about. Sort of like, I don't know, it gives like a lot of personality to the magical items.
Sure.
So like a bag of holding, it came about because this bag was given a purpose. I mean, it sounds silly, but I don't know. I think with enough creativity, you can come up with some good ideas for like how do you give a bag purpose?
Sure. And then if its purpose gets corrupted, it becomes a cursed magic item.
Ooh, yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
I've got some of those.
Sure. But yeah, in a campaign that is lighter on magic items, or just where magic in general is more rare, or just magic items are more rare, that's definitely a way that you could do that, and that would definitely feel really cool for the players, I think.
Yeah, I still have like the concept of enchantment still exists in Aurelia, but largely that sticks to the more simple magic items. And
Sure.
part of that was just the balancing of not wanting the constant, we're going to go to the magic item store and buy our magic items.
Sure, yeah.
Oh yeah, you're in a major city. Go find the nearest magic shop. How much gold? Oh, you have 4,000 gold a month. You buy whatever you want.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Well, I think that'll do it for the Dragon's Horde. Thank you very much, Damien. Once again, that was Hope's Justice, submitted by our guest here. So, Jeff, if anybody else wanted to submit magic items for the Dragon's Horde, or questions for our main segment, or stories for the funeral pyre, time's kind of running out, but how would they do so?
They could do so by sending us an email at interpartyconflict@gmail.com or joining us on our Interparty Discord at bit.ly/interpartydiscord.
That's correct. And I'll actually take this moment to say that for our, I think, I haven't talked this over with Jeff yet. So Jeff, if you don't want to do it this way, please tell me. I think what I want to do for the final episodes of the show is keep going with regular numbered episodes till we get to 250. And then after episode 250, to really wrap everything up, I want to have an extra little bonus episode. And for that, so that's not going to be, we're not going to deal with questions. I think we're actually going to use up all of our questions that we have saved in episode 250, I think is my intention. As we've kind of done the last couple of years, is we've just kind of rapid fire gone through a whole bunch of questions to get them off the list. I think I want to go through all of the questions we have left. So listeners, if you have any questions you want us to answer, you got to get them to us before then.
Right.
And then for the episode after that, the wrap party, I suppose, listeners, similar to the listener submissions episode that we had last year, if anybody would like to submit any audio, or I guess if you want us to read something or whatever, if there's anything you want to send us to put on our last episode, that's what we're going to do. So any questions, any tabletop gaming related questions, get those to us before episode 250. We'll get those all out of there. But then for the episode that's after episode 250, the actual final everything or whatever, if anybody wants to submit audio, if you want to submit, if you want to give us a shout out, if you want to shout somebody else out, if you want to, I don't know, give us well wishes for the future, whatever, anything you want to submit, any audio that you want to end up on the podcast, get it to us before, whatever this theoretical episode 251 is, because that'll be it. So I plan for that to be a big, blowout, exciting, lots of fun stuff that's going to be on that episode. I've got some stuff planned for that episode that I think is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So Damien, would you like to tell our listeners where they can find Adventures in Aurelia or anything else that you're working on?
You can find Adventures in Aurelia on our website, adventuresinaurelia.com, and Aurelia is ERYLIA. Mm-hmm. You can also find us in whatever podcast apps you use. Go ahead and search for the show. If you don't find us in your podcast app, go ahead and reach out to me, and I will see what it takes to get submitted to it. I'm trying to be everywhere, but there's a new podcast app every other day. So if you happen to use one that I haven't heard of that doesn't just pull from another catalog, I'll do what I can to get us out there. Other than that, I stream on Twitch. I stream under Damien_the_DM on Twitch. Mostly it's games. We do a weekly stream with myself, my wife Caitlin, and one of my players, Chantel. We get together and play multiplayer games every Wednesday starting around 8:30 p.m. Pacific time. And previously, and I'm hoping to get back to it in the new year, I do more tabletop-oriented streams other days of the week, mostly things like map making and world building.
Cool. So lots of stuff. I'll make sure to put links for all those in the show notes. So if you if you didn't catch any of that, I mean, you're on a podcast, you can just rewind it. But if you didn't catch any of that and you want to see it in text form, check our show notes at InterPartyConflict.com. And then one more quick thing to check out the other podcasts on the Crit Nation Fellowship. Check out Crit Academy at critacademy.com. The great people over at Crit Academy make new and reusable content for players and DMs alike. They're going to be coming out with Extraordinary Expeditions. That Kickstarter passed. It completed its goal. So that's going to be coming out sometime next year, I think. And yeah, they got great stuff. Also check out Brute Force and Ignorance. They're an actual play podcast on the network. They've got some great stuff over there. And check out D&D Character Lab and the Kind GM podcast as well. We've got some great podcasts on this network, so go check those all out. Enough of all the admin. Let's get into some questions. Jeff.
All right. Our first question comes from Seawood Scribe on Discord, and they ask, when recording an actual play podcast, what are the best recording software options?
Yeah. So small spoilers, everybody. This is... I think all of the questions that we're doing today are actually from Seawood Scribe about this topic. So
yeah.
So enjoy, I guess. So yeah,
perfect
Damien.
episode if anyone's wanting to get into the actual play area.
There you go. And
Right.
I think that's good because this isn't really something we spent a ton of time on the podcast in the last 5 years. So I think it's a great time to go over some of that, especially with someone who's actually done this rather than just
Finally
Jeff
get to
over
call
here.
myself an expert at something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what's some good recording software?
Oh boy. So one of the hard things to answer with this question is the term software.
Okay.
Because Adventures in Aurelia is a all in-person show. We actually use a hardware recorder for it. Personally, I am a fan of and recommend the Zoom product lines. We started out with a Zoom H6, which is a small compact meant for field recording hardware recorder. And now we use a Zoom L12, which is a much larger mixer that is meant for live stage performances, being able to record as well as broadcast them.
Okay.
So the main thing with a hardware recorder is it records directly to an SD card, which means you are removing any of the issues that can come from recording directly to a PC, be that hard drive space or CPU issues with things.
Interesting.
However, depending on how someone was to record not just an actual play, but any sort of podcast with software in mind, I'm actually recording both my side and the two of you together. On my end, software wise, I use Hindenburg Journalist, which allows for not only recording but multi-track recording. So if you have a discrete input for every person, then they can all be on their own tracks, which is another one of the benefits of a hardware recorder is our show. Every single person is on their own track, which means each microphone is on its own file. So it's not all mixed together when you're editing. We actually started out with a single input. So all 5 microphones were mixed into a single track, which meant that if someone coughed or shuffled, it was baked into the track. There's nothing you could do about it. So
I will have left that cough in there. Yeah, no, it's that is definitely a consideration.
And especially for an actual play, I think multi-track is kind of necessary.
Yeah.
By default, you're going to have, standard party is usually 4 players, 1 DM. But even with 3 players, 1 DM, you're going to have at least 4 people. People are going to talk over each other, cut each other off, or 2 people are going to mumble off to the side. So being able to edit all of that out is a big part of what I do as far as the show goes.
Yeah.
So there's things like Hindenburg Journalist can do multi-track. Everyone that deals with audio knows about Audacity.
That is what we use.
I'd still recommend it for recording. I'm not a fan of it for editing, and there's a big editing topic behind that probably doesn't fit this show, but feel free to reach out and ask me if you want a rant on that.
Sure. I've definitely had issues with Audacity. However, I know how to use Audacity, so I keep using it.
Yep. And people learn on it. They learn its quirks, but it's one of those things. Once I went away from it, I couldn't go back.
Sure.
If you're doing remote, typically you would have everyone record however they're going to record. Since Audacity is free, a lot of people will record just off of Audacity. But if you're using something like Discord, a very popular thing to get is a bot called Craig, with its friend bot, Griark, which is Craig backwards, both of which are made by Yaweasel. And they are a bot that can join your channel and record, I believe, even multi-track directly from Discord.
Yep, I think, it keeps everybody on separate tracks and everything.
Yep, so if you wanted like a all over the web, that's probably one of my recommendations. There's a bunch of things like Skype call recorders that can record people through Skype, including some of them will be able to route the audio from each person to its own track to get that multi-track. So software-wise, my main recommendation would be make sure you can get everyone on their own track, kind of regardless of how you're going to do it.
Yeah. Jeff, if I'm not mistaken, didn't we, when we first switched to being remote back last year when the quarantine first hit, didn't we try using the Discord, the Craig bot or something?
We did. It was because of the way that like Discord servers work, there's sort of like a cap in quality as far as like audio quality and video quality when you're like streaming on a Discord server. You can pay, you can pay like premium or whatever to get better better quality sound and video for things like that. But like it didn't turn out like super great, but it's doable though. Like it's still usable. And Craig is good because I always liked using Craig because like if there's ever a time where like somebody like loses connection and then comes back in later, like it keeps in time with the track.
Oh, okay.
So like, somebody can leave the call, come back in, and it'll basically leave a blank space in that track. And that way, like when you pull up and want to edit it, there's not going to be weird gaps.
Sure.
Or it's gonna have the gap where it needs to be rather.
Okay.
So like it was good. It was good for it. It's good for what it does.
Yeah. Yeah. So we use Audacity, or at least I do. I'm assuming Jeff still does.
Yeah.
Audacity is, like Damien said, it's good for recording, whether you want to edit with it. It was easy for me to learn on it. So, that's what I'm going to stick with, at least for the time being. I really do got to stress though, like, don't just record everybody on the same track and then just like ship it out. You gotta edit it. If you especially if you're recording remotely and you don't edit out, like, or at least fix any sort of like pauses and latency issues, it's gonna sound terrible. You really gotta at least put some time in order to make sure that it's lined up here, it's lined up there. If you can listen through all of it and fix spots that need to be fixed, beyond that, however much time you want to put in is up to you. But like, you really got to edit something if you want people outside of your group to enjoy listening to it.
And if it's just for you and your group, then it's just for you and your group too.
Yeah,
I run into a handful of people that talk about the concept of an actual play podcast. And one of the first questions that I ask, because I've been doing this for so long, and I'm by no means like big in the space. I am a tiny, tiny little show in comparison to a lot of things out there.
Sure.
But the first question I ask is, do you care if anyone other than you and your friends listens?
Yeah, there you go.
And if they don't, then, I mean, my standards, like, usually if I'm giving advice, it's talking about gear and budgets and stuff. If you don't care who listens, my, like, base $800 to $1,200 budget goes down to, like, $2.
Yeah, sure. Whatever microphone you got, put whatever time you want to put into it. If you don't want to put in time, fine. If it's just for you and your group, yeah, just do whatever is suitable for you and your group.
Yeah, I mean, like smartphones. You can get an app that can record audio.
Sure.
A lot of smartphones nowadays have decent microphones and can pick up a lot of background noise. So like you can I don't know, you plug in a cell phone, put it in the middle of the table, record everybody.
Yeah.
If that's all you really want to do.
We've done that.
Yeah.
I hated it.
That's
That's how the show actually started. But
Yeah,
it works.
before I decided we were going to be a podcast, it was just these were audio note taking.
Right, yeah.
And then I didn't want to sit through and have to listen to that every time. So I started cutting things. And I was like, hey guys, I've actually put a lot of work into this. Can I put it out on the internet?
Yeah.
Our next question from Seawood Scribe again on Discord. What are tips and hacks for shortcutting or expediting the post-recording editing process?
Yeah. I kind of said a little bit of stuff about editing a minute ago, but Damien, do you have any particular tips about expediting the editing process?
Brace yourselves.
Because, yeah, listeners, editing takes a long time. Like a lot. Okay.
I get a clicker. So I can see that on the when I'm editing the show. So I got a clicker that, like, when we go to break or we know that there's a cut, I'll do a couple clicks. So the shortcut there is when I realize that we're getting off topic and we've kind of deviated from the actual play part of the session, I know that I can look forward to find those clicks and pretty much just cut out everything. Like it helps shortcut the 5-minute conversation, so I don't have to sit there and actually listen to the whole thing. I can just kind of jump through until I see those clicks on the track. Other than that, unfortunately, short of actually getting on your group to stay on track,
Yeah.
there's not a lot of ways to shortcut audio editing without actually listening to it minute for minute, second for second. My editor, I can actually I can play it back at like 1.5 speed.
Sure. Yeah.
Which, if you get used to it, can help if you're just trying to do a quick pass. But at least for the style of show that I like to do, I can't utilize that function. But I also fully admit that I kind of over edit the show because I'm going for high quality, highly produced content. Kind of the best shortcut is gonna be looking at, as cliche as it is, look at things like Critical Role and the way that they don't get super off track too long. If something needs to be like looked up, other people are quick to jump in and fill that space. So it's not a bunch of dead air that has to get removed. If it's dead air that you're looking at, one of the things that Audacity actually does really well is it has a multi-track truncate silence ability.
Yes, I was going to mention that.
Yeah, where you can just have it take all of the longer gaps and trim them down to, whatever you decide is a long enough gap to not be awkward, but shorter than whatever it was. You can take those 30 seconds sitting there reading something and just automatically cut them down to 1.5 seconds.
Yeah.
And then more precisely edit from there.
I made this other podcast with our friend Steve about this stupid TV show from the 90s. And when I was editing that, truncate silence was such a huge help because we would have, we would be recording for like altogether maybe 5 hours. And then I would go and I would take the entire track and then I would apply the truncate silence function to it. And the track would be like 20 minutes shorter because over the course of those 5 hours, there was that much, just like little bits of silence where one of us just was sitting there just thinking about what we were about to say, or maybe like looking something up or whatever.
Or I think like sometimes you guys would like watch little bits of the episode that you were talking about. We would do that too.
Yeah. So yeah, just like not having to go and cut each of those out manually, because that's 20 minutes of silence that it removed. If I was removing that, it could have taken, 25 minutes, 30 minutes to find and get rid of all of them as I'm listening. So that is definitely an important thing. However, the trick with that, though, is it has to be silence. So
Yeah.
let's say you have to look up a rule or something and you're hoping that later it'll remove the silence. If you are narrating what you're doing, like, okay, let me flip on page 45, no, 47. It's not going to cut that out. You have to be silent in order for it to cut out the silence. So you kind of have to train yourself a little bit to be quiet at the parts where you're not saying anything, and for everybody else to also be quiet during those times, just to make that worthwhile.
Yeah.
And one of the things you mentioned there that's another help, just it's kind of good recording. I don't know if etiquette's the right word, but skill is you commented on you guys would stop to think about what you're going to say.
Yeah.
And that is another thing that is kind of a shortcut to editing is instead of talking yourself through waffling about figuring out what you're going to say, stop, take a second to think about it. And then instead of having to cut around what parts of this are worth keeping in, okay, I stopped and thought for 15 seconds and then I said a complete thought instead of 14 little pieces of thought spread out over 2 minutes. So I had to cut 5 seconds here, 7 seconds here.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good point.
Like these, and a lot of these are things that like it's more like pre-production, pre-record, like during recording.
Yeah.
And like not everybody who is being recorded understands the process of editing and knows what they should be doing. Like even just like positioning yourself in front of a mic so you're actually getting, like everything is being heard, because
Yes.
if somebody's talking off mic for half of what they're saying, it's going to sound weird and you might have to do some extra editing to make it sound not so weird.
Yeah.
So like, maybe making sure everybody is fully understanding that, like, okay, please talk into the mic, stay close to the mic, make sure it's in front of your face, put intentional gaps in things that you're saying so there's enough room for you to actually cut. So you're not cutting in mid word, you want to, when you're making a cut, you want to cut at the part where there's no audio so
Sure.
that there's not weird, like little jumps and gaps and like little starts and stops in what's being said. So like a lot of it is done before the recording even happens. You'd like tell everybody like, microphone etiquette and things like that. But that's kind of tough to do, especially when it's the whole idea is like you're a group of friends playing D&D.
Yeah.
Like you don't want to dictate how your friends speak with one another. You want everybody to have fun, and like tangents are fun. Like that's why they happen. Like, cause you go off on a tangent and go off on a joke or something. And like everyone's laughing and having a good time. Oh shoot, we were recording something. All right. Do your clicker thing. And now, okay, everyone's back into it. Now let's get going.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't want to stop that, but.
And I intentionally don't try to police that too much in my show because at the end of the day, we are all a group of friends and us having a good time playing, especially since we don't make a lot of money. I'm not paying them.
Right.
Us having a good time playing matters more to me than having a super tight recording session.
Sure.
And kind of building off of that, there's a lot of like just general recording etiquette that you kind of pick up over time. One of the rules that I was taught is interrupt intentionally.
Ooh,
It's a lot easier when you are all in the same room because you're not dealing with the latency of the internet or potentially not being able to see someone to get the visual cue, but it's not trying to brute force yourself into cutting someone off in a scene unless you are trying to brute force yourself in character to cut someone off in a scene.
Right. Also, just a couple more little etiquette things. Anybody who has listened to our outtakes on our Patreon will probably notice that a lot of my outtakes start with me saying, I'm going to cut this out, but that is number one, to let everybody in the recording. So basically let Jeff know that what I'm about to say is an outtake. So don't, you can relax a little bit and not feel like what you're saying is going to go out on the show. But also it's to remind me while editing, hey, Gabe, you were going to cut this part out.
Right.
So then I'll go and I'll cut that part out. And then the other thing to mention is this has been serious. Maybe serious is a bit too serious of a word to use. This has been a frustrating problem whenever we've had in-person guests, and that is the like making sure that everybody is right up in the microphone is very, very important with in-person guests. And I'm sure that Damien can agree with me on this, because if you have 5 people in the same room, and one person is right on the mic, second person's right on the mic, the third person is not right on the mic some of the time, and they are right on the mic the rest of the time, that means you have to go through their track moment by moment and either increase the individual volume when they're talking not on the mic, or decrease the volume of everybody else when everybody else is talking. Because if I'm talking directly into my mic and Jeff's mic is picking me up a little bit, if I increase the volume of his entire track in order to account for the few times when he's not got his face right in front of the microphone, that means my entire talking is going to be louder on his track than it needs to be. So if everybody can be like right on the mic the whole time, it's a lot less work to make the whole thing sound good than if everybody is kind of sometimes sometimes they're over here, sometimes they're over there. It can be hard. If everybody is remote, it's not as much of an issue, because like if Jeff, for example, is at his house right now, his microphone isn't picking up my voice, hopefully. I presume his microphone is not picking up my voice.
Wait, let me put my headphones on the microphone real quick.
Right, yeah.
So it's easier to, I could just increase the volume of Jeff's entire track or apply compression or something to it, and it's not going to increase the volume of me when I'm talking because I'm not on Jeff's track. Mm. I'm not sure if that made any sense, but like when we recently did our last Halloween actual play, actually, that went up on our Patreon in October, and I really wanted to do that in person because we were playing the terrible RPG, and that works better in person. However, we had our friends Peter and Jeff's fiance Skylar on there, and nothing against them, but they're less disciplined when it comes to being on the mic. So I kind of had to go moment by moment through the entire track, because otherwise some parts they were way too quiet and other parts they were way too loud if I increased the volume, but then that would make everybody else that was in the room way too loud or way too echoey. And so that was actually a very long, very difficult edit, because I hadn't really cracked down on making sure everyone was directly on their mic the whole time.
Yeah.
And like Damien was saying, I don't really want to police that. I probably could have put out the track without all of that editing. It wouldn't have sounded as good. I'm sure it would have been listenable, but I hold myself to a higher standard. So I did set aside the time to go through and edit like every moment of everybody's track. And it did sound way better once it was done.
Yeah. The trick is like, you want it to be, their voice is the loudest thing going into that microphone by far.
Yes.
So that you can actually bring down the volume a little bit and you'll barely hear anything else in the background.
Yeah.
So you just want to make sure that like that's, what the microphone is picking up is by far their voice.
Yeah. Yep. Generally, if you're trying to increase someone's volume by 20%, you're increasing their volume by 20%. That means the loudest part as well as the quietest part. And plugins can help with some of that.
Sure.
The one thing that plugins and editing cannot help with is what is in the waveform is in the waveform. Yeah. So if you are trying to take 2 people talking at the exact same time and you need to boost someone's up, by default you are bringing in whatever the second microphone is picking up from the other person talking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We recently bought new microphones that have really helped with avoiding that.
Oh, cool.
Yes. Yeah. There's a lot of like hardware side of things that you can do to help. But again, it does also come down to like knowing how to use it, like, microphone etiquette and things like that.
Yeah.
Another thing, just because Jeff kind of mentioned it in regards to leaving gaps to cut around.
Sure.
Keep in mind your tone as well when you're talking, because it does sound weird when someone has to cut something and you started out with the first part of what was being said at a tone like this, and then they cut out something and suddenly it jumps into a tone where you were just in a totally different space in how you were talking.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's good to keep that in mind for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Because if like the beginning of the thought and then the second half of the thought happens like 5 minutes later after a tangent or something,
Mm-hmm.
So it can sound really weird when the cut kind of like bridges that gap.
Even just in our regular podcast recording, like that happens a lot. There are a lot of times where I will want to cut out like a particular tangent or something, but I tried for 20 minutes to get the beginning and the end to sound good together, and it just doesn't sound good. Mm-hmm. So in the end, I decided to just leave the tangent there because that sounded better overall.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes you can't avoid it. There's not a clean enough break. Yeah. So if you try to edit it to make it more, all of a sudden it's talking like that and you've missed something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This can actually go into a little bit into the next question here. Again, from Seawood Scribe is, how do you prevent or reduce side conversations that are fun at a normal game but would distract and annoy a podcast audience? So, like,
sure.
What are we doing to help reduce the need for the editing?
Sure. Because like I've said in the past that the game that you played was probably a ton of fun at the table. It was a ton of fun for everybody involved. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be fun for other people to listen to that weren't there, that weren't in the group.
Right.
So side conversations can be a part of that. Because, yeah, it might have been a ton of fun. Maybe you were joking about something that happened earlier that day. Maybe you were joking about, even if you're joking about something like in-game, being there isn't quite the same thing as listening to it from the outside. So, yeah, how do you prevent or reduce that sort of thing other than just telling everybody, hey, guys, stay on topic?
The two simple answers I have to that is, one, I don't.
Okay.
Because in the session, I don't do anything to prevent or reduce it.
Sure.
Followed by two, I edit my show.
There you go.
I do what I can to take a lot of that out when it comes to editing the episode. We were talking about it before we started really getting into the show, that on average, our recording sessions are about 4 hours long, and our episodes are between an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes.
Yeah.
So I am cutting out about 50% of what we record. Now, to be fair, some of that is usually the 10, 15, sometimes 30 minutes before we actually get going, where
Sure.
I've hit record just so we don't forget.
Right.
Things like our breaks, but I'm using it to record right now, but I'm working on the next edit right now. I think I'm about 12 minutes into edited audio, and I've already got something like 8 to 15 minutes of cut audio.
Sure.
And, for at least for my show, it's one of those things that also always gets better the longer we play.
Okay. Yeah.
Whenever we're new, it doesn't seem to matter if we're together 2 hours before we start recording, 3 hours before we start recording, almost without fail. We start recording, we get into the session, we've recorded our intros and everything. It probably takes about an hour to really stay in to the recording phase the whole time instead of drifting into side conversations all the time.
Sure.
But the biggest thing is especially the way that Seawood worded the question, with things that are fun at a normal game but would distract and annoy a podcast audience. If you have enough self-reflection to realize it would distract and annoy your podcast audience, it doesn't go into the episode.
Yeah, so you can fix that just in editing. Just cut it out.
Mm-hmm. And kind of to tie to the last question and this, since we've been doing this for so many years and I know that I make those editing decisions, when we have a topic that we start getting off topic long enough for, I put on, especially as I give myself the fancy title behind Adventures in Aurelia. I am the DM, editor, and producer.
Okay.
So because I'm used to all of that, I also put on the director's hat once in a while running a session where I realize that we're off topic for a little bit, and we're starting to wrap things up as far as the off topic goes, and I'll look at the player and be like, all right, so come back in. You guys were just entering the inn, so we're going to come back in. Go ahead and say that you're entering the inn, and we'll lead into you approaching the innkeeper like you were before we got off topic, and then that'll give you talking to another player the chance to say the line that you had here, play that out again, and that helps with that whole tone thing that I was talking about before, where now, depending on how well we did it, I can either take the before we were off topic or the after we were off topic version of that lead into a scene.
Sure.
So that helps a lot, is when you can recognize that you need to realign yourself and actually direct how. Yes, you're playing a home game. You're also part of a production.
Yeah.
So treat it as such and think about how it's going to be when you're producing the show, to say, okay, since I have to cut around that, I want to give myself enough of a lead in that the part before we got off topic isn't, all right, we enter, because this is where we've been, all right, so you guys are entering the Farron's Favor, which is the inn that they have been staying at. And then if we come back in and I suddenly cut to, so as you guys are talking to Tariel, the matron of the Farron's Favor, and there's a whole like gap between like, wait, how do they go from point A to point B all of a sudden?
Yeah.
So I actually have a kind of a question. Like, do you, during your recordings, do you notice, like, do you have an awareness of when things are starting to get off topic? Like, has that sort of like, I know it's not always easy to recognize when you're in it, but like maybe just in your experience, have you started to recognize like, okay, we're starting to get off topic here?
It depends. Sometimes, especially as you mentioned, if I'm part of it,
right?
No. However,
Right.
I will catch that. And though this isn't a video show, I bought one of these. This is a little hourglass. I think it's a minute. It might be 2 minutes. But that sits on the table in front of my DM screen. And when I realize that we are off topic, I will flip it over. And that sign of me flipping it over is kind of the unspoken warning to everyone at the table that it's time to get things back on track, wrap up. We've been going on this tangent for too long. When I realize that it runs out, because by the time I flip it, that is me withdrawing from the conversation. I will no longer contribute to it because someone kind of has to take the lead there.
Sure.
So
okay.
At that point, I'm kind of keeping an eye on where it is. And when it runs out, then I step in and make the more hard cut. Okay, guys, it's time to move on. We are recording, so let's get back to things. I've only had to do that like once or twice in the entire time since I've had this.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just sort of like a last ditch sort of.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, when you brought up the clicker, I'm like, oh, that's a really good idea, and like, oh, maybe you could also like click the like you can click 3 times for we've been off track for 3 minutes, so you can see the 3 clicks and then backtrack 3 minutes in your timeline when you're editing, and then like, okay, that's where it started. But it's like, but you're not gonna know exactly
Right.
when you start getting off track.
Right.
But like it's like, well, maybe like if you do this for long enough, you might start to recognize those things. So you'd be like, okay, all right, we are starting to get off track here. So you note the time. You start a timer, or you have your hourglass. Like you could start a timer. It's like, okay, we're off track. We've been off track for about 5 minutes or so. All right, here we're gonna start going back into it. 5 clicks, and then and then go on from there.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're not going to always catch yourself getting off track.
Usually you know that I'm reaching that point when I look at my watch and I go, well, it's 11:30, and then I look over at the recorder. We've been recording for 2.5 hours. Look at my notes. We've checked off one of my goals for this session. We need to get moving, guys.
Right.
Yeah. The timer actually makes me think of the little hourglass makes me think of, like, we had a question a long time ago about, like, would you ever set a timer for your players when they're taking their turns in battle? Because, everybody always complains about battle taking forever in D&D. And I think I had said, like, I would never do that. I would never want to get to a point where I needed to do that. But I wonder if an actual play podcast would actually be the time to use an hourglass with your players, because a turn that takes a really long time is going to be way harder to listen to as a listener than to listen to as a player that's actually at the table. So that might exacerbate the issue enough that maybe I would try using a timer or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
I've actually, over time, gone with the players, and we've implemented a couple things to help with specifically the combat turn things.
Yeah.
A lot of that is we kind of have a soft turn and a hard turn where we go through once to kind of figure out the math, figure out the mechanics, how the move is going to be. And then we have a little bit more of a narrative turn where we've already figured out a lot of, like, I'm moving here, I'm going to use this. So then we will have a lot more succinct turn where, since everyone kind of already knows what they're doing, they can get through their turn really quick. And that's the one that I will use for the show part of things. So it's kind of figure out your turn and then narrate what happens.
Okay, so it's not that you're doing, like, one turn and then the next turn. It's like you do one turn twice, basically, is what you're saying?
Yeah, kind of like, okay, you're figuring out where you want to move, how you want to target, what spell you're going to do. And now that you've figured out all this, now we'll pick up the dice. We'll go through and say, okay, I'm moving 5 squares over closer to this guy, casting this spell, attacking with this weapon. Roll dice. You already know what you're doing. So we use D&D Beyond, so you've already got the stats required for that pulled up. Yeah. And it just kind of the plan turn and then the actual taking of the turn.
I have to say, that's actually kind of amazing. Good job on that. And that's the kind of detail that I feel like you would never know without hearing someone who makes an actual play podcast talk about it. Because, like, that doesn't ever, I don't think that would ever come through on the actual podcast. You would just hear, everybody just knew what they were going to do and they did it. They didn't waste time picking spells and so on and so on. That's a really cool idea, a really cool way to do things.
And it helps, like, my player aside, like, we use D&D Beyond, so that helps with a lot of the number crunching, a lot of looking things up. All of my casters either know how to manage their spell list on D&D Beyond, or they have the Gale Force 9 spell cards.
Sure.
And so, like, one of my players that plays a cleric has the like Magic the Gathering Pokemon card sleeves in her binder that she has all of her spells in, and she has, like, all the ones that she can take at the back, and then when she's preparing her spell list, pulls out the ones that she's going to have for the day and puts them in their own pages so that she has them easy to reference. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to need this and this today. And then when combat comes, she flips to the page that has her combat spells.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Our next question from Seawood Scribe. How do you strike a balance of getting to know the players and keeping the focus of the pod on the characters?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess in your case, it's like you already know the players.
I think they mean for the listeners to get to know the players.
Sure.
This one's kind of difficult for me because it's actually changed as the show has gone on. Partially because I edit a lot more tightly than I used to. I used to leave in a lot more of the side conversations. Sure. I actually remastered our entire first season and cut out probably 12 hours of audio from our first arc of our story.
Oh boy.
Because I used to leave a lot of that stuff in, and one of the actual negative pieces of feedback, not just someone like leaving a negative review, but actually gave actionable feedback, was that they felt how much we got off topic pulled them out of the story and made it too hard to follow.
Sure.
So I started to make that more a thing in my mind when I was editing things. So I kind of don't try to strike a balance anymore in the podcast itself. And for me, like the kind of cut and dry answer to that is you can find me on Twitch and you can join our Discord. If you want to get to know us as people, I am extremely active in our Discord. 3 of us are streaming at least once a week. So there are ways to get to know us that not only let you get to know us, but let you interact with us, because there's that thing that's hard when you are listening to a podcast and you start to feel that you know someone as a friend, is you're never getting interaction back and forth. You hear them, you start to realize that you have things in common with them, but they ultimately don't know who you are.
Yeah.
And when I started to realize that, because I listen to so many shows, it kind of made me realize that when it comes to an actual play, they don't really need to get to know us as people. If they want to know us as people, then interact with us on our platforms that you can know us as people. Like, we hang out when we're streaming, we're in a Discord channel that people in our server can join if they want. We've got a couple people that, like, we try to do once a month that we'll play a more party style, anyone can join game. We play like Golf with Your Friends, Tower Unite, really low-key games that are kind of just a hangout session. And we've got a couple regulars in our Discord that'll hop in and just chat and hang out with us for the night.
Yeah. Now that you mention it, like, I don't really think that you do need to balance getting the listeners to know the players. I think that either they don't need to know the players, they only need to know the characters, or if the players are strong enough players, they'll get to know the players through how they play their characters.
Yeah, and as a small indie show that doesn't get a lot of interaction, the shows you listen to, especially on the smaller end, are going to love hearing from you more directly. They're going to love if you reach out to them on social media, join their Discord, hop into their streams. They're going to love actually getting to talk to someone that listens to what they do and cares and likes it. And I think that will go far more for forming a good relationship with someone than just the personality that they let themselves be on the podcast. Because there's also the side of things that people that are being recorded are going to behave and act differently. You put a big, like, this microphone's not small. You put it in front of someone's face, they're aware that it's there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't really know how to describe it, but I do feel like I've noticed when I'm on the podcast, I'm kind of a different persona than myself. It's not that different than myself. I am kind of a lot like Gabe from InterPartyConflict, but it's not 100%. There is I definitely carry myself differently on the show than I do when I'm just myself. I feel like I'm a lot more pedantic in real life. I don't know, but no, like, yeah, there is a little bit of a disconnect there. So yeah, I guess, because I listen to a lot of podcasts too, and it is a little weird when I feel like I know the hosts of a podcast. We've had a lot of guests on this show over the years, and like a couple of them are hosts that are hosts of other podcasts that I had been listening to for years when we had them on as guests. And so I had to tell myself, Gabe, you don't know this person. This isn't this person who you've been a part of their life for a long time. Treat them like a person you're meeting for the first time. Don't treat them like you're familiar with them. And, for better and for worse, I think that's kind of how I treated some of our guests at times. So,
and it's difficult. I mean, if you really want to look into the psychology behind it, the term parasocial relationships is something that comes up more and more nowadays, especially with how big Twitch is. And as much as it can hurt to hear if you really like a show, especially a bigger one, is at the end of the day, they don't know you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why I push, if you're interested in us as people, joining our streams or our Discord where you can actually know us as people, like, and we'll know you as people as well.
Yeah. So I guess, so I don't really think there is a need to balance those like Damien was saying. Hey everyone, quick little sidebar. The last half hour of Damien's track unfortunately had some technical issues. He and I both tried messing around with it to try and see if there was an easy way to fix it. Unfortunately, it ended up being a bit more trouble than it's worth. So bear with us. I think that the rest of the episode is still great and still perfectly listenable. Just wanted to address that in case you think something's wrong with the file or with your MP3 player or whatever. Everything's fine. Just a little technical difficulty. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
All right. Our next question from Seawood Scribe is, do you give PCs plot armor in actual play, and what are reasons for or against?
Yeah, because like I haven't listened to a ton of actual plays, but the ones that I have listened to, it's a pretty safe bet that none of the PCs are going to die, or at least like probably not without, like, they're probably not just going to die from like a stray arrow from, a goblin or whatever. If they die, it's probably going to be a big thing that's like a big part of the story. So yeah, is that, like, Damien, is that something that you guys have talked about before or during anything that you've done?
It's not something that we've talked about. I actually don't know how my players would feel about it if one of their characters finally died.
Yeah.
But they, at least from my side of things, they definitely don't have plot armor.
Okay.
Their biggest form of armor comes from DM struggles to balance encounters armor.
Sure.
Where it's like, I don't want to hit them too hard, and it's like, I don't intentionally try to pull punches. Sure. I when I'm building an encounter, I run them through Kobold Club back when it existed. It has since died, and other people have picked up the project under new names.
Oh, okay.
D&D Beyond has a encounter builder as well, that helps handle the math side of how D&D counters are supposed to be built. With you've got players of this level, so they need to fight creatures worth X amount of experience, and so I do all of that work beforehand, and depending on how you run it, the players can get lucky. The action economy doesn't go the right way. So I think I've yet to bring a character actually unconscious yet, but it's not really a conscious decision I made. It was more of I planned for this much to happen. According to the math, it says this is a deadly encounter. But they didn't die. But also, my show's a little slower paced and a lot more narrative, where they don't get into a lot of combats.
Yeah.
So I haven't had a lot of opportunities to kill them yet. Like, Grimfang was the biggest fight that they've had since being this party of characters. And while I believe a couple of them came close, on the one hand, I kind of overtuned their side of things because they got NPCs to help them.
Sure.
But narratively, those NPCs also made sense, and I didn't want to just throw, okay, there are 40 gnolls because this is supposed to be difficult.
Right.
And some of that is, building a custom monster. It didn't do as good as I expected it to do. Like, I built this guy up to have things like life drain mechanics that, when half of the challenge is under the assumption that he's going to be healing while dealing damage, but he doesn't deal enough damage to out-heal them, can really change what could have been a very deadly encounter to being like, yeah, we just killed him before he got to us.
Sure. Yeah, back when we did do our actual play thing, I feel like there were the encounters that I knew would probably be pretty deadly, and so those ones had a built-in escape route if I needed to. Like, I had an NPC there that would come in and save them if it was necessary, or I had that encounter, the enemy was intending to run away once once they got the upper hand, if they did. And I don't really think it was necessary. In fact, in the latter case, the players managed to completely incapacitate the NPC and then take them prisoner. But then there were also a couple encounters where I was like, okay, this is going to be like a really meaty encounter. And then the players just completely steamrolled them. So in my limited experience, it hasn't really been a big thing. However, I've got ideas in my mind of doing an actual play sometime in the future once this podcast has ended, someday maybe. And when I do, I do plan on having a talk with the players and saying, do you guys want this to be something where you have plot armor either explicitly or not explicitly, whether the audience knows it or not, or do you want there to be the possibility of your characters dying? And I want to honor either of those. Like, I personally don't really like to kill PCs. I prefer when there is maybe unspoken plot armor. However, if the players don't want that, I don't want to force it on them. I want it to be something that is discussed at the beginning, the beginning before anything is recorded, so that we could all go in being on the same page. I think that, because we had an episode a few months ago about, I don't think that having plot armor, even if it is explicitly stated, I don't think it's as big of a problem as people might think it is. Like, if that's just the general conceit of the campaign, there's other ways to create tension. The PCs might have plot armor, but their friends and their town don't.
If it was that big of an issue, then things like the big long fantasy stories wouldn't be a thing if plot armor was enough to make a story terrible.
Sure.
Because if you're an author writing a 4, 6, 8 book long series, unless you plan on constantly creating new characters,
right,
your main character has plot armor until you reach what you deem the end.
Pretty much, yeah.
And so, kind of like the way that I guess I would word the way that I have plot armor in my campaign is that I let the dice decide.
Sure.
I don't try to make sure no one dies, and if the dice kill one of the characters, then that will be something that we handle as it comes up. Mm-hmm. I've had NPCs die. They've actually had an NPC that they were pretty close to died in the pre-podcast campaign. Mm-hmm. They had finished the quest that they were on with a group of NPCs, and the pseudo leader of their group that led them into this cave system was killed at like the home stretch because they were ambushed.
Sure.
And I'll do things like, a big thing that I like to do is I'll utilize waves or some form of morale for my combats, where if it makes sense, it's really easy to have a few extra creatures in the sidelines that the players don't know about, that if you need to ramp up the difficulty, you can bring them in.
Sure.
Or morale mechanics to actually have creatures run away. Mm-hmm. So if you're trying to determine plot armor or not, and you don't want to have an explicit people can't die, that is a thing that you can do as a DM to, especially as you're figuring out how to balance things, utilize techniques like that so that you're not overwhelming or constantly underwhelming your party.
Sure.
But I'm not the biggest fan of the idea that PCs in the story can never die.
Yeah.
But part of that for me is that's also what separates an actual play from a written story.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. I think either option can work. There are various reasons for and against, but it really just comes down to what kind of a story are you trying to tell, and what are the players up for?
As a listener, I'd prefer not to know.
Sure. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. It probably would reduce a bit of the tension if there was, an explicit statement of these characters are not going to die. So maybe don't do that.
Right. It's like, yeah, you already know It's like watching a prequel where this character's alive in the next movie, in like the next part of the story. Like, they're not gonna die here,
right?
Like, the movie's trying its best to put as much suspense into this scene, but I know they're gonna survive.
Right. They're in the Adventure Zone. They're I think at the end of the main campaign of the first campaign that they did, it was established how at least one of the characters dies. Like, after the campaign was going to be over, they were like, okay, how does your character eventually die? And so when they went to go do live shows where they played as those characters, they would make jokes about like, oh, I know my character can't die because we already established how my character is going to die. And, it's played for laughs, but like, there's still anyway, it does kind of undercut a little bit of any tension, but at the same time, their live shows aren't really about having deadly encounters and there being a lot of tension,
More non-canon comedic shows.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. So, do you guys have anything else for any of these questions? Anything else you want to talk about actual plays?
You should listen to them.
I fine with me. All right. Well, I think that'll do it for our regular questions for today. We do still have our social media questions. Our last social media question was, do your characters tend to all use the same weapon, or do you try to have each one use a different weapon than the others? Damien.
I'm a DM. It's in the name, Damien the DM. So simultaneously, my characters don't exist, but I also play a lot of characters that use a lot of different weapons.
Yeah, fair
because
enough.
I play all the NPCs.
When was the last time you got to play as a player?
We have a side campaign that we play very sparingly, usually because scheduling is such a difficult thing.
Sure.
With adults that have children. And I play a cleric that wields a quarterstaff in there, but I'm a cleric, so I'm mostly using magic.
Gotcha.
I have a quarterstaff if I need it.
Jeff, do you recall if you had an answer?
I forget exactly what I said, but I know for a while I was a big sword guy.
Mm-hmm.
I think more recently I was more of like a hammer guy. But really, it's like I try to put more variety in the weapons that my characters use, and usually it comes down to what is the most optimal weapon for the particular character and build that I'm going with, and like that, which sometimes does tend to be the same weapons, just because like there's the way that the numbers work. But
sure.
But I usually try to take that into account when I'm like, no, I should try and pick a weapon that's a little bit more exciting or unique or something. So I don't know. But yeah, it was definitely like, 'cause who doesn't like swords? But
yeah, I'm a sword guy as well.
Yeah. But I think I like big war hammers. I think those are a lot of fun. So like if I'm two-handing, if I have a character who's going to two-hand something, it's going to be a big hammer.
Sure. Over on Facebook, Darren W. says, Malik would use his spells as a sorcerer, but only until he let his temper get the better of him. Then he usually went for his daggers, which often went the complete opposite of what he was trying to do, and ended him in a situation where the other party members had to rescue his butt. But generally, he had daggers, and that was it. Jake F. says, after picturing myself as a mostly blunt weapon guy, I found the characters I've played the most use slashing weapons, mostly daggers or longswords. I'm not sure I've ever noticed the lack of variety. I plan to correct this in the future, currently playing a conquest paladin with a magic longsword. Doe! Over on Reddit, Alstar the Minotaur says, all my characters use a variety of weapons. Krilla, my merfolk war priest, used a trident, which is a bit on the nose, admittedly, and Shepard, my human Templar, went with a longsword. My namesake, however, Alistar the Minotaur, used a great axe. Thanks to some serious rules lawyering and 3.5's treasure trove of game-breaking mechanics, he was a large creature wielding a gargantuan adamantine great axe. I'll just editorialize here. That is one of the most 3.5 sentences I have heard in a long time. That 66 plus strength and a half back in 3.5, I was consistently doing nearly 100 damage around, and I wasn't even the most dangerous character in our party. Yes, that is accurate. Arcanist Winterbrand says, most of the time I play a spellcaster, so no weapons for me most of the time. Of the 2 times I played a weapon-wielding character, both ended up with weapons that had the versatile feature, longsword and warhammer. I like having a weapon that can give me options based on the situation. Yeah, that's definitely something to consider. Twitter, we did not get any, and I'll just read a couple on Discord. Jacob the GM says, always try to change it up, even if it's just a flavor thing. Deborah Soar says, there are only 2 groups of weapons, sniping range and hashtag YOLO. Depending on the character, I'll use either. Stiltskin Kupo 84 says, I think my mind has differentiated strength weapons from dex weapons. Like all of my dex characters use daggers, but some use bows or rapiers or short swords. Meanwhile, all my strength characters use throwing axes and hammers, but could use either swords, axes, or hammers in melee. Small character weapons are also a thing in my mind, and I think I'm more likely to give them a war pick and a hand crossbow. I think I've only ever built one character for polearms. That's potentially my biggest blind spot. Autumn Wind says, my characters tend to not use weapons. Minor Illusion is definitely my staple cantrip. Now that I think about it, my paladin was the only character that really used weapons. I mostly play casters. My monk, of course, used his hands. Even my character on deck, a rogue, will use Psy Blades from level 3 on. And Collins B says, I like to think that I use different and unique weapons, but invariably it ends up being whatever first magic item I stumble across becomes my signature weapon. I know that feeling.
Yeah.
Yup.
It's definitely a thing. So that was our last social media question. Thank you, everybody who wrote in. Our next social media question is, do you listen to any actual play podcasts? If so, tell us your favorites. Damien, do you listen to any actual play podcasts?
So there's a show that's been out for about 4 years now called Adventures in Aurelia. I think it's a really great show. The DM seems to put a lot of care into it, and
We should have him on as a guest.
Yeah, you guys should reach out to the DM and see if they'd like to be on the show.
Yeah.
On a more serious note, I actually got into podcast listening through actual play podcasts. The group that I started Pathfinder with actually introduced me to Nerd Poker way back like 6-7 years ago.
Is that with Brian Posehn?
That is with Brian Posehn. Okay. I have since way moved on from it. It was my introduction, and I realized that I'm not the biggest into the more comedic side of actual play podcasts.
Sure.
But from there, it introduced me to the genre, and I really branched out. There's a show called Dungeons and Randomness, which is actually the inspiration for me to have made my own show. I was listening to their story, and it got the idea for me that I wanted to create my own world just like they had, and tell stories that other people would want to listen to the same way that I wanted to listen to their stories, and have that same investment. And from there, it's just spiraled out. I listened to quite a few of them, and without kind of going into them, if you want to hear about any of them, go ahead and ask me. I'm in the Interparty Discord, but I listen to the Glass Cannon podcast, Androids and Aliens, Ballad of the Seven Dice, Critical Role, Four Orbs, Redemption, which is actually a Star Wars actual play, and God's Fall are the ones that are like still currently going that I listen to. I've listened to some that have come and gone in the time that I've been a listener.
Yeah. I think Justin from Crit Academy recommends God's Fall. I think they might have even had somebody from God's Fall on their podcast at some point. And then our Jeff and my friend Jay has just started listening to Glass Cannon, and he has recommended that one quite a bit. I don't really listen to very many. Apart from Adventures in Aurelia, I listen to the Adventure Zone, and I will say that their current campaign, Ether Sea, is shaping up to be very, very good. So I do recommend that. And I've listened to the film Reroll, of course, but that's more of a more nebulous. They go from movie to movie pretty much. So Other than that, I don't really listen. I've listened to like a handful, but I don't really keep up with many of them.
Yeah, I'm sort of the same way where like, yeah, there's a couple where I'll tune in from time to time, but for the most part, I don't really listen to actual plays.
Yeah.
That's not to say that people shouldn't go listen to ones such as Adventures in Aurelia, but
Sure.
it's just not like I don't listen to a ton of podcasts in general.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know.
I just find that like narrative stuff is harder for me to follow than just discussions. Like even just audiobooks. I feel like at my job I would be great at listening to audiobooks all the time, but whenever I do listen to audiobooks, I have a strong feeling that I'm missing a lot of stuff, even though I don't have that feeling when I'm listening to a discussion. So I don't know. So it's harder for me to get into an actual play. Once I'm familiar with all the characters and stuff, it's usually pretty easy to keep it going, but it's hard to listen to a new one. I tried listening to the current campaign of Critical Role, and I don't know, I just was not impressed with the first 4-hour episode. It just didn't stick in my brain as much as I thought it would.
It honestly helps. I know that you can kind of relate that I work in manufacturing, so
yes, well, so do I.
I have 30 plus hours to listen to stuff.
Yeah.
And not really for any particular reason, but kind of like you, as some of the actual plays I listen to have faded into the ether, I've been picking up a little bit more discussion-oriented shows, but a lot of those are kind of for selfish reasons. I've been picking up more writing and world building and game mechanics things, mostly for things to help me run my own show. And I think that's one of the reasons why I got into listening to podcasts, actual play podcasts so much, is because I was in the market of creating my own. So I listened to actual plays to see how they did it, see what I did and didn't like in an actual play.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of inspiration.
Sure. Yeah, whatever works. Find it wherever you can get it. I just realized that, so a few weeks ago we had Freeman from Encounter This on, and he told us that they were going to be they were going to start releasing an actual play podcast that they're doing. They're going through the Pathfinder module, the Abomination Vaults, which Jeff and I are actually playing in Jay's campaign. And I actually just like an hour ago got an email from Freeman that that's going to be starting. If it hasn't started yet, it'll be starting by the time this episode goes out. So I'll put that link in the show notes as well. So along with Adventures in Aurelia, along with the other podcasts that we've mentioned, I'll put the link to that one as well. So good timing, I guess. So I guess that'll do it for our questions for today. But before we close out, let's wind down, let's relax, let's take a deep breath. Twilight has fallen. The beasts have been slain. The townspeople have been saved. Your job is done. It is time to set your armor down in the retirement village. All right, today's retirement village story is actually brought in by Damien here. Damien, you have the floor.
So, as a DM, this isn't my character, but a character that wasn't a campaign that I ran. It's actually the very first released episode of our main story arc, which is our Aurelian Epic, involved a player retiring a character. So we had Nixie Nimnackle, who was a bard that joined the Guild of Adventurers in the city of Riven. The city was attacked shortly after she had joined the guild, and she joined the party that was the first pre-podcast campaign in going into the lair of a combined goblin and kobold force to essentially wipe them out as best as possible. And through the course of that adventure, decisions were made that she was unhappy with, and upon returning after killing things that she believed were to some extent innocent and just the dangers of having to fight, they return back to the guild hall, and as the party kind of broke off into their own rooms to decompress from things, she wrote a note, slipped it into one of the characters' rooms, and left. She essentially just saying that the adventuring life wasn't what she thought it would be when she sought it out. And instead of continuing life as an adventurer, she would prefer to, as a bard, tell the stories of the adventures that the rest of the party was going on without her.
Cool. I always think that's really cool when a character does just decide they would be better off not adventuring, and then going in and sharing the tales of the party or whatever other adventurers are out there. I think is a worthwhile endeavor. It's
honestly surprising more don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Like if you really got into the mindset of your characters, it's surprising that some of these characters don't have some traumatic brain stuff going on. It's like, no. I don't do that anymore. I did one and I'm done.
Right. Yeah. I think it's kind of the gambler's fallacy or whatever. Like they can't stop gambling. They just keep doing it until they eventually die.
How else are they going to get the equipment to put in their store?
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. All right. Well, let's raise a glass in memory of Nixie as we ask, tell us another story.
Clink.
All right. Well, that'll do it for today. So, Damien, thank you, of course, for coming on the show. Thank you very much.
And thanks for having me.
Would you like to tell our listeners once more where they can find Adventures in Aurelia, if there's anything else you're working on, where they can find you on social media, that sort of stuff?
You can find Adventures in Aurelia at adventuresinaurelia.com. That's ERYLIA. Or look us up in your favorite podcast app. We're on things like Apple, Spotify. We're even on the Facebook podcast thing. I don't really know how that works, but we're there.
There you go.
You can find us on Twitter under @AureliaPod. You can find me on Twitter under Damien the DM if you're interested in checking out things like the streaming that I do. Other than that, my Twitter's mostly talking about mead stuff because I'm a
there you go.
Amateur home brewer.
Sure. Well, so that'll do it for today. To submit questions for us to discuss, items to the Dragon's Hoard, or stories to a funeral pyre, please email us at interpartyconflict@gmail.com. For show notes, links to media mentioned on the show, and running lists of questions and magic items, go to interpartyconflict.com. Join the discussion on social media. We're on Facebook, we're on Reddit, we're on our Interparty Discord, we're on Twitter @InPartyConflict. Check those out for our weekly social media questions. Your answers might end up on the show. Find us on the podcatcher of your choice. We are on Google Play Music, iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you download podcasts. Please rate, review, subscribe, or just tell a friend. We've gotten rid of most of our Patreon, but we do still have a $1 tier if anybody would like to just help with hosting fees for any of the foreseeable future. Also, there's tons of content that you will gain access to for that one single dollar. We've got hundreds of outtakes, dozens of bonus episodes, lots and lots and lots of stuff. So if you want to help out the show and get a ton of stuff in return, that's where you can find it. Jeff, tell us about FriendQuest.
FriendQuest is a YouTube channel where you can watch us play video games.
There you go. Also head over to bit.ly/interpartyconflict to take a one-question survey about the show. And that question is, what's your favorite memory from the show? So check that out. And if you take it, just for taking it, you'll get 2 free printable board games, courtesy of the great people over at hollandspiel.com. And our music is made by Boxcat Games from Nameless the Hacker's RPG. So, Damien, until next time,
listen to more actual plays.
There you go.